Ishmeet, you can start.
Thank you. Here's to the crazy ones, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the one who see things differently. You may disagree with them, glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward, and while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. Keeping the spirit alive, on behalf of Trisectrix, the Mathematics Association of Sri Venkateshwara College, University of Delhi, I, Ishmeet Singh,
And I, Rishika Panwar,
warmly welcome you all to an exclusive one-of-a-kind webinar, Mathemagical Symposium with respected Professor Brian Winkel. Mathematics, being a universal language, has proved that hurdles are no barriers when true minds connect. And today we are extremely honored to have among us a distinguished personality renowned for his exemplary contributions to the world of mathematics, Professor Brian Winkel. We would also like to extend our gratitude to our respected Vice Principal Dr. S. Venkat Kumar, faculty members, and all the participants for gracing the event with your benign presence. Without further ado, I would request our worthy Vice Principal Dr. S. Venkat Kumar to please say a few words.
Good evening to all, and my special uh, gratitudes to Professor Brian Winkel. I was just following your discussion, sir, and it was really wonderful that, a person who has done such a huge work in the field of mathematics has in fact thought of walking into what we call the modeling. And the very topic is very interesting, mathemagical. So, and I've gone just through the issues that are coming up. I, being a commerce man, I believe in what I teach to my students. Fundamentally, somebody should be not risk averse, love to take the risk. Because once you have the tendency in you, you are the confident guy and you are going to do something without trying to look at taking at the risk. It's like anything that is there on the face of the earth, which has its birth and will have its death, with nothing being seen as contributions. So therefore, the very thing, take risk, take challenges, do something, come out with something novel, and become a wonderful creator, an innovator. So mathematical modeling, in fact, assists or helps a lot. Though I am not that conversant with mathematics, let me honestly admit it. So I'm more a kind of behavioral teacher, in fact, looking at the students, but the wonderful students and faculty of mathematics of our college, they motivate a lot. And I had wonderful occasions of interacting with all these people. And every time I meet them, I have something new to learn. Either it is Professor Swan Singh or Budhiraj, R.K. Budhiraja or Deepti, or for that matter, Shakuntala, or any of the senior colleagues of the department. And even the young lot who has just joined us, they have something to contribute and they believe that, there is something which the mathematics can bring in, the life. I have to honestly tell, the life. Without mathematics, there is no life, I believe, and it's a truthful statement, an honest statement from my side for the simple reason that quantification sometimes is not the right perspective to think about any kind of academic achievement. But when there is no yardstick, a benchmark to evaluate your achievements, you don't really believe like going beyond that also. So benchmark is only something which is the minimum. And of course, the maximum, everybody would not hesitate to accept the fact that there is no what we call the boundary for the maximum. So I really love to listen to you, sir. I was just amazed to listen to some of your opening discussion with my colleagues on this platform. And Venkateshwara as such, a college which is celebrating its 60th year of its existence in Delhi University. And philosophically, we are very strong because we are funded by a trust where philosophy and other things has its grounding. So therefore, mathematics can also teach us some kind of philosophy as to how the modeling takes us, understands the world as such, or for that matter, in the present day scenario, I was just simply going through some of the statements given by some of the mathematicians relating to this very pandemic, the modeling, how it might go, how it might peak, or where it may just try to have its plateau and then just come down. So that means mathematics has its relevance anywhere and everywhere, not just confined to one particular scientific knowledge of understanding it. And greatly the Indian philosophers, if I would be simply straightly telling you, sir, many of these philosophers of this Indian soil, they have had a wonderful footing in astronomy, and mathematics is a wonderful, what we call a supportive tool for these astronomical thinkings. So great physicists have become good sons or good philosophers in Indian soil, and they've gone across the globe to make the philosophy of India known to everyone. And we are delighted to have you amongst us today. And I totally believe and understand that our students and our colleagues would be really enthralled with your wonderful lecture of today's evening. Thank you and welcome you again to this virtual platform of Sri Venkateshwara College, University of Delhi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. On this great evening with the merging of minds, we welcome you, sir. We now move on to the most important aspect of today's evening. We hope that this talk with such an eminent personality will take us all on an inspirational journey and will ignite our minds. The chat box will be open for questions throughout the session. However, we will be taking the questions in the Q&A session that will be happening towards the end. I would now like to invite Professor Suhan Singh to cordially introduce Professor Winkel.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Mathematics Fraternity of Sri Venkateshwara College, I extend a very warm welcome to Professor Brian Winkel. I'm really thankful to him for accepting our invitation to deliver a special lecture when we are celebrating the Diamond Jubilee year of our college. I'm also thankful to Dr. Venkat Kumar for giving such motivating remarks and observations. Well, I've been given the task to introduce Brian, and he is going to talk about his life journey. So I don't want any repetition. So I will say in a very few lines, which will explain his personality. I met him on a social platform, LinkedIn, in 2015. And the moment we realized that we have common interests, that of mathematical modeling, our collaboration started. And I have been invited twice in the last 6 years by him to attend 2 conferences, symposiums related to mathematical modeling. He is such a nice and helpful person. He's always ready to help you out. And when I visited one of the symposium, I came to learn through some other colleagues, which he himself has never told us, that he took voluntary retirement when he was at the peak of his career, and he and his wife, Phyllis Winkel, who is a wonderful person, they donated a large chunk of money of their retirement fund to start this platform, Simioide. And he is very passionate about mathematical modeling and using it to solve certain problems. He has started this concept of Scudum competition. For the last 4 years, students from Sri Venkateshwara College are taking part in it. he keeps on thinking, and then at times, if you look at the problems, you will find that he simply loves mathematics to solve practical problems. One of the problem in 2018 was how to use physics in waste management. Last year, there was one problem related to corona pandemic and requirement of beds, how to estimate requirement of beds related to due to the corona pandemic. So I welcome you, Brian, on this social platform, and I'm really thankful to take time from your busy schedule. I know you have just shifted after spending 24 years in New York. You have just shifted to Ohio, and you have just told that even you haven't got your internet connection yet. So I'm really grateful to you for accepting our invitation, and now it's all yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Swarn, and thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. I appreciate it, and all of your students. I guess I'm going to share my screen and show you the presentation that I'm using. You can see that, right? And first of all, I want to thank everyone for the invitation. I am currently a retired or emeritus professor of mathematics. And in my retirement from that, I formed this project called Symiode, a systemic initiative for modeling investigations and opportunities with differential equations. And we have received some funding from the United States National Science Foundation, but now we're pretty much on our own. I want to thank Swarn very much and the Mathematics Association and the students for inviting me. I'd like to dedicate this talk to my dearest friend Satish Bhatnagar, who comes from Bathinda in India, and he is at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He was my office mate in graduate school, and he's been my lifelong friend for over 50 years. I am very thankful to Satish. He writes many, many articles and books on Indian history, in particular the history of mathematics and philosophy, the kind that Dr. Kumar was talking about. And Satish sends me each week at least one essay on his observations. He is 80 years old, and he is teaching still at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. And then finally, I would like to thank Anirban for his help in setting up the technical talk. Okay, so the title was Mathemagical Symposium. It's Be Prepared so that you can seize opportunities and you can take risks, but you must be reasonable. You do not take foolish risks, and you will accordingly grow professionally. This will enable you to contribute, and when you contribute, you will feel very good about yourself and the world in which you live, and you will be happy. That's my philosophy. So I have changed the title of the talk from Mathemagical to Matha-realistic. And I have added on the bottom one more phrase, to be passionate. That is, to believe in what you're doing, not to be obnoxious or rude, but to learn how to be polite and yet at the same time be passionate and aggressive. It is very interesting that your college is celebrating its Diamond Jubilee or 60th anniversary at Sri Venkateswara, because I too started my college experience 60 years ago. I was a first-year student in New York City at a small liberal arts college, and I began my studies. This is a list of my grades in my first semester of college. And I show you this because you will see they are not particularly good. I passed all my courses, but I got a C, which is the minimum passing grade, but I did better in mathematics and got a B. Not great, but better. So sometimes things don't start off so well. But 10 years later, I have received a PhD in mathematics from Indiana University. And it's through the great help and assistance of my wife, who I married while I was in graduate school, Phyllis, that I was able to complete that because she was supporting and teaching as well as my own teaching. So while things don't always start off well, they can end well. So let me give you some examples, and this whole talk will be example after example. And in the questions or discussions after, I hope perhaps you might bring some of your own examples or compare what I am offering to what you think your future might be, especially students, and for faculty, some comparisons of where you are and how you might progress. So my first lesson is to be prepared. And, you know, study hard. I learned to study with other students in small groups, study groups. In fact, I lived in a dormitory that was to be torn down. And so we painted one whole wall in our room black, and the wall became a blackboard. And we could use chalk, and we wrote on the wall in our room, and we did our mathematics together around that wall. And it was very helpful because I would write something and Ray Brewer, my friend, would say, no, that's not true. And he would erase it and we would argue. And so this was all part of becoming prepared and be very proactive in preparing. Namely, we spent time making the wall. We would use the wall as the blackboard. We would leave things for each other to look at. We would write notes to each other. We would always converse. Then you want to seize the opportunities as they come to grow. One of the things I did very early on was I worked in the kitchen serving food. And in 1961, some 60 years ago, the wage in the United States was 80 cents an hour. But I got jobs tutoring mathematics, and I was paid $20 an hour. That was 25 times the minimum wage. And I learned that the knowledge I had in mathematics was valuable to other people. And the skill of communicating mathematics and helping younger students learn their mathematics was valued by their parents, and they would pay me to do this. I would go to their house and in the afternoon, and usually by dinner time, the grandmother would say, Brian, why don't you stay for dinner? And so instead of returning to the dormitory and college food, I had a wonderful, wonderful Italian or German or Russian dinner because many of the students I tutored were immigrants from all over the world, including India. Take reasonable risks. I always take reasonable risks. I had practiced the piano and the organ, and I tried out to be the college organist in chapel, and I was accepted. And so I played the organ for the college church services, and they paid me for that. And so I liked playing the organ, and they gave me money to do that. You got to make mistakes. While I was in college, I thought I could do it all. And so I signed up to go into Manhattan, which is the main part of New York City that people think of with the big buildings. And I cleaned walls in the office buildings at night. Full-time work, full-time school. And after about a month of that, I had to quit. I just couldn't do it all. I had taken on too much. But I learned from that not to do too much, to be reasonable in the amount of work I did. So you want to grow professionally. And one of the things I did was I got myself elected as the president of the college math club. It was a small math club, but as the president, I could initiate activities and invite faculty to give talks, and we could go on field trips. You want to contribute in some way, and tutoring was, but another way was to volunteer. And I volunteered at a local boys club, And there was a young man named Lester, and I was his friend at the Boys Club for a whole year. And then I graduated and moved on. So volunteering your time to help others is a way of giving, but it's also a way of receiving so richly. Be passionate. I was a swimmer and I competed in swimming in high school. And when I got to college, I didn't have a swimming team, but I took a course in life saving and became a lifeguard at a lake in a YMCA conference center. And that passion for swimming led me to this job where I met my wife, Phyllis, and we've been happily married for 55 years. So I also became happy when I was a freshman in college because I learned that I really liked jazz music, American jazz music, and I could often go into New York City and listen to jazz in some of the clubs. I was not old enough to go inside, but I could stand in the doorway on the street outside and listen to the music coming through the door. So let's talk about my professional opportunities. And in sharing with you this, I'm hoping you can see how your life may unfold in different ways than you ever imagined. And this is an example. So I went to Indiana University for my PhD, and I got a degree from Professor Goro Azumaya, a Japanese algebraist, famous algebraist. And I studied ring theory. And the problem was, when would a certain kind of ring have quotients or fractions? Under what conditions would this ring have these quotient rings? And but I took a position after my degree at a small liberal arts college in the state of Michigan. It was a small department of only 4 faculty members in mathematics. And I found the science library. Now, up until that time, I was at a big university, and the only library I knew was the mathematics library. So I would go to the library and look up mathematics articles, always mathematics. And when I found the science library, I began looking at journals in ecology, in chemistry, physics, geology, actually economics. And I began to see differential equations in all of these sciences. And I wasn't at an engineering school, so I hadn't learned about engineering applications yet. But I became very curious about the mathematics of differential equations and why they were appearing in all of these sciences. There was not that much algebra or other materials. So I began teaching differential equations. I was assigned to teaching the course. And the first time I ever taught the course, I used models. And the first model I ever used was called the sterile male mosquito. You sterilize male mosquitoes, you release them into the population, they impregnate the females, who then don't have fertile eggs, and the population, instead of spreading, dies off. And I taught my students some basic principles and told them to go home and develop the more detailed model. And so that was my first experience coming from exposure to the science library, which was just down the hall. And when I got my PhD, I never imagined I would be teaching about sterile male mosquitoes. In the 50 years of teaching, I only taught algebra course once. I have a PhD in algebra, but I only taught that course once in my life. It's not because I didn't like it. It's because my life was drawn to modeling and applications, and I became a convert. I taught modeling, I taught operations research, I taught statistics, and I taught differential equations many, many, many times. So I'm going to jump around and give you some examples of other opportunities that you're going to see. And my life is a faculty, but it is true of people in business. It is true of your college and university. As the university grows, it sees new directions. It sees, for example, that in a statistics program, maybe we need actuary science, or in a computer science program, now we need data science. So learning to look around you and see what's needed and what's possible is very, very important. And I'm going to give you an example. In the United States and around the world, people take an exam called the Putnam exam. It is a very, very difficult exam. Most students will get 0 out of 100 points. The problems are so hard that students who try it are very unsuccessful. So I and several colleagues formed a Lower Michigan mathematics competition where we had teams of students and coaches come to one school to work on problems, while the faculty in another room discussed teaching issues. So we got the deans to pay for faculty development and travel to this one site, and the students would then compete and share in the afternoon their solutions, and they felt successful. They gained confidence. They met new student friends they didn't know, and the faculty became professionally developed, and the deans were happy because their faculty were engaged. So there was a need that I never thought about, namely forming a mathematics competition. And I did this after maybe 2 or 3 years of teaching. And that competition still exists in Lower Michigan after almost 50 years. You have to be careful in life because you will make mistakes. And my son, who teaches entrepreneurship nearby where we just moved to, his name is Doan, D-O-A-N, and Doan has told me that you need to make mistakes because that's the best way to learn. Not critical, serious, dangerous mistakes, but mistakes. One of the things I did is we had student projects when I was teaching at West Point, the military academy. And one student called me and wanted to know, I cannot get the MathCAD software to do a 3-dimensional plot. Could I help him? And so I sent him a file which had the instructions on how to plot 3D. But what I didn't realize is the file contained the complete solution to the entire project. It didn't just contain the instructions. And so what I had done was I had sent 3 of the students, and there were like 800 in this course. And now 3 of the students had the complete solution to the project. And the honor code at West Point, where I was teaching, required me now to release it to all students. No student could have one advantage. So what happened was, instead of the students having a project that they invested lots of time and getting grades, we just canceled the project and gave them silly short questions. And they were very upset that they didn't get to do the project because I made the mistake of handing out the solutions in advance. And I've never done that since. You can take opportunities to mentor people. This is part of contributing. You can listen to a friend. Listen to a friend who's concerned because of isolation due to COVID, or listen to a friend with some other issues or problems, or celebrate with a friend. You can mentor fellow students at the tutoring center, math club. You can be the go-to person in the dorm. My first year in graduate school, I lived in a dormitory with undergraduates, and every student in the floor would come to me with their math problems, and I would help them. It felt wonderful. You can be a formal mentor of students. You can encourage them. Never just say to the student, yeah, but. Never use the word but. Always acknowledge their perspective and their dreams, and never discount their ideas or their energies. You can be a formal mentor of faculty. My last position was at West Point, and I spent most of my day mentoring young faculty, visiting their classrooms, talking about teaching, talking about careers, conferences, how to find co-authors, etc. Service. Always try to give some service in any organization you're doing. That doesn't mean that the service has to be something you don't like, although sometimes you do that. Every place that I've ever been, I've sought to be the speaker or seminar organizer. And this was because I got to meet the speakers. I got to pick the speakers. I got to go to the airport and go to dinner with them and get to know them. I got to talk to them after the talk. I became a new friend, and I would call upon them in the future for activities. So the volunteer service of being the speaker or seminar organizer proved to be very, very helpful in my career. And I enjoyed meeting people all the time. Embrace technology. I was of a generation that used the slide rule. I didn't use it because I was not an engineer, but I embraced the calculator and I used them all the time. I was never very good at by hand computation. I'm in mathematics because I like X's and Y's, not because I'm an accountant and like numbers. I used Maple, a computer algebra system, on a mainframe early on, and it expanded the nature of problems that I could assign my students. And I began to do deeper and more intense modeling experiences because I could collect and use more data, and the computer could handle the data. So embrace technology, whatever it is, be it Zoom, etc. You need to learn to say no. I too often say yes and do too many things. There are costs when you say yes too much. It costs your energy. You don't realize it at the time, but you're tired. There are costs because there are directions that maybe you could have taken that might have been more enjoyable. There are costs because you're always breathing hard because you're like exercising your mind. And there are costs to family. Less time with family when you volunteer to do this, when you agree to write a paper, when you do this. So you need to be careful about how you say yes and no. And frankly, I have always erred on the side of saying yes too often and doing too many things. And also when you say yes, you can rush a job because you're multitasking and you might not do all of the jobs as well as if you just did fewer. So occasionally say no, and maybe suggest a colleague who needs to be pushed a little bit to engage. In other words, maybe John is the person you might want for this task, and give the person John's information, and they can call John, and John will be happy because someone is paying attention to him. It's okay to be selfish. One year I was in Michigan and I had to get home for holidays to New York, and I didn't have much money. But the United States government agency, the National Security Agency, was having interviews for summer jobs. So I signed up for an interview for a summer job, and they flew me to Maryland, which was closer to my home. And then I took a bus to my home for the vacation. And I had really no interest in the job. I was selfish. I just wanted to get home for the holidays and they would pay my way. But when I got there, I found out it was a fascinating place to work. They were using mathematics in the service of national security. And I wound up taking a summer job and worked there for 2 summers. And the second summer, I was married to Phyllis, and we spent the summer in the capital of the United States and all of the beautiful things that Washington, the capital, has. And it opened the door to much longer opportunities involving codes and ciphers, including publishing a journal on cryptology. I did not go to work for the NSA because it was too hot in Washington, and also it was not an academic job, and I preferred teaching, but I always valued my experience. In 1977, I wanted to teach a course in cryptology, so I could not find any texts. So I started a newsletter, and I tried to send out a physical newspaper letter for other colleagues to get ideas on materials because everything was classified, and I couldn't find unclassified, but some people were doing work. And lo and behold, I learned about a group called Aegean Park Press, and they were publishing World War I crypto manuals. And they said they agreed to publish a journal. So now I was a young faculty, 7 years out of my PhD, and I was going to be editing a full academic scholarly journal. I became the editor-in-chief by default. I was refereeing manuscripts. I was producing the journal. I was mailing them out of my house. My children were stuffing journals. Later, after 30 years of doing that, we sold the journal to Taylor and Francis, an English publishing house, for $100,000 US. Currently, Cryptologia is the name of the journal, and it is offered free to members of the Mathematical Association of America, and I'm very proud of that. I started a second journal on microcomputers, and none of the disciplines had journals about how to use computers in the 1980s. And so I did that for 11 years, and eventually each discipline got its own computer journal. And so I decided to stop publishing that journal. And my lesson there is you got to know when to quit. It's time to change or stop. And I founded a third journal. I was sitting in a lecture hall and wondering why there is no journal devoted to undergraduate teaching in the United States for practical sharing of techniques. So while I was in the lecture, in 1 hour, I formed and designed a journal. I called it Primus, Problems, Resources, and Issues in Mathematics Undergraduate Studies. That was on a Saturday. I came home on a Monday. On a Monday, I wrote to some friends and I said, I'm going to start a journal. How would you like to write some articles? I wrote to some other friends. And so I published that journal starting in 1990, and it's 31 years old. And again, I sold it to Taylor and Francis, and it's offered freely. When I sell a journal, what I mean is they take care of all of the mailings, all of the printing, or all of the online website, and then the editor just concentrates on the content and the interesting materials. So I formed 3 journals in my life. 2 of them still exist and are proudly offered freely to the Mathematical Association of America and are published commercially by Taylor and Francis. See good in people. I take pride that I have the ability to see what potential there is. I saw that when I looked at Professor Swaran Singh's website about doing modeling. I could see right away that he was interested in modeling. And so I keenly focused on contacting him. Study the skill set that the people you have. Determine how receptive they are to new ideas. Engage them initially to just test. Are you really interested in this? Do you want to do modeling? Do you want to do cryptology? Are you interested in music and art or whatever? And have conversations and then more fully envelop them as a friend. And support them during periods of transition. They may be going through career changes and you're there for them. I had great success in developing editors to take over the journals that I started. And I'm very proud of those young people who do those journals now. They've expanded them greatly. They've improved them greatly. They've increased the circulations. And my project that I'm involved in, Symposium, I have a wonderful technical director who was I mentored as a faculty at West Point and who now lives in Canada. And he is the person who does all of the technical work for Symposium. I retired from teaching, but I have taught in small liberal arts colleges. This is the order of where I taught. I took a sabbatical to an engineering school from a liberal arts school. And then I wound up teaching at an engineering school, Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. I had a sabbatical at a distinguished Ivy League research school. I wound up teaching at the US Military Academy, and I mentored faculty, and I took an academy leave 1 year to teach at the Air Force. If you're a faculty and you have the option to take sabbaticals, you need to do that. It's very, very, very important because it gives you the opportunity to refresh. It's usually financially rewarding. In the United States, you can deduct all of your expenses as a tax deduction, like a long business trip. So your room and your board, your rent, your food, your travel is all deductible off of your taxes. It gives your family a rich experience, a whole new set of things. Yes, it's disruptive in making a move, and that might not happen right away in COVID, but it gives you a new setting. Later in my life, and I'm coming to that point, I decided, as Dr. Swarn Singh said, to form an organization devoted to modeling in differential equations. I gave it the acronym SYMIOD, for Systemic Initiative for Modeling Investigations and Opportunities with Differential Equations. You can look up SYMIOD online by just typing SYMIOD. It's symiod.org. And we have about 4,800 members. I funded workshops initially with the large salaries that the government had given me. And that's when I invited Swarn. And later he spoke about a second workshop. His wife, Suruchi, who teaches at another college in the University of Delhi, came. And eventually Swarn and Suruchi visited us with his two children, Nimish and Nandini. But I found that faculty liked what we were doing and we were on to something. We attempted 4 times to get funded from the United States National Science Foundation. That meant I worked with colleagues very hard to get funded, and we were rejected 3 times, very unsuccessful. We finally got funding. We ran workshops. We did lots of things. I've run workshops in Panama independent of that. That's when you could travel. I wish I could travel to New Delhi now for this and visit with you personally, but that's not happening. So SYMIOD is this organization which allows people to come together online and shares resources on how to teach differential equations using modeling. Too often you take a differential equation course and it's technique, technique, technique. Students want to know, why do we need to know these techniques? And the mathematics instructors usually say, don't worry about that now, you'll see that later. And I got tired of that. I got tired of not sharing the excitement of applications of differential equations. So I switched entirely to introduce an application first, and then the differential equation would follow. And students would be motivated to solve the differential equation because the application was so interesting to them, either from biology or chemistry or physics or economics or even linguistics. So what we develop in SYMIOD are modeling scenarios, activities that the students can use to build their own. We produce peer-reviewed publications that people can teach, and we have been migrating to a new platform in an organization called CUBES, which still hasn't finished yet. It was supposed to be done in June, but we're getting there, okay? So SYMIOD has all of these activities, and it's advancing students and keeping them interested and excited about the mathematics that's in differential equation, because many students take it for engineering, for science, for courses like physical chemistry, etc. We have 3 efforts in SYMIOD that generate some funds to support the technical work. I, as a director, receive no salary or stipend, but in the future, when I turn it over to a younger person, I want to have enough revenue generated so that they can get a stipend for some release time. So we have a student challenge. We have a conference that's coming up in February, and you can learn all about this by just looking up SYMIOD online. And we have an online text. The challenge is called Scudum. It's we've run it 6 times. The last time we ran it was in November. You have 3 student member teams. Everybody was remote, and they could be from one school. Received awards, successful, meritorious, and outstanding. And here I'm happy to announce one of the outstanding teams was from your school. And they worked on a problem on how birds use animal fur to build their nests, and what are the ecological and evolutionary benefits for birds to use animal fur in addition to leaves and other sticks to build their nest. And these are the students who competed, and I think I saw some of you earlier, and I'm glad to meet you. And your coach was Professor Kumar. So you have been receiving a certificate, and your video will be posted. The next thing is a conference that we have, and it's coming up in February. And again, if you just type Symposium Expo, you can learn all about it. We have a small cost of $25 for students, $45 for faculty, and it's a 4-day conference, and you can come and go as you please on the social platform that we have. We have keynote speakers. We have a escape room competition. We have a math bowl. We have talks by students, student poster sessions. So if you're a student and you have work that you've done and you'd like to present it, or if you're a faculty and you want to share things that you're doing, it is not a research conference, it's about teaching. The social platform allows for one-on-one instant conversations. We have many forums for different themes, and we're looking for more people to give talks, and we would love to have talks. And we've had talks from India and Europe and Australia, as well as from the United States and the Americas in the South America. So that's coming up. And then finally, we have an online text that we are offering people. It's 600 pages. The text has been written by a colleague who believes, like I do, that if you bring the modeling first, then the differential equations will follow, and students will be highly motivated, and they really are, because they want answers to the modeling issue, and the differential equations have them. So we try to sell lifetime access. Once you get this book, you'll get free updates of all of them. And right now it's available as a PDF online. And there's a rich set of resources, including hints, solutions, code in various languages, including Maple, Mathematica, MATLAB, and I forget the other one. It's lots and lots of projects. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about an example, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to run over a little bit. This is an example of what I mean by modeling. We're going to model a falling column of water, and all of this material is online. If you go to Symposium Torricelli, you can see everything that I'm talking about, and all these resources are readily available. Students can collect their own data. They can conjecture an empirical model, namely just fit the data. Then they can build an analytic model from some first principles. They can create a differential equation. And here comes the, oh, we need to solve this differential equation. Teacher, won't you help me with some techniques? They may need to estimate a parameter using the data. And then finally, completing the cycle of modeling, they need to compare the model with the actual data. So we have videos where you can watch the waterfall, and you can see a clock in the right. You can tell how high the water column is and at what time, and you can collect the data. Here's some data that I collected from that video. And you can see the time is in seconds, the height is in centimeters, and you can see the height falling. And you can look at it and make some conjectures. And one of the things maybe is you think it's linear, but there is a linear fit, and it doesn't look too good because the data seems to have a bow or bend. So maybe you try exponential decay, but that does bows a little too much. So maybe we ought to try to understand what's going on instead of just fitting data. And we should look at the data and maybe examine how fast it's falling. And right there is when you begin to introduce the notion of the rate of change. This is the heart of differential equations, not just studying how much, but how fast something is changing. Not just studying how high, but how fast the height is changing. So getting students to think about the rate of change, the notions that they learn in their calculus, and then applying it to mathematical differential equations historically is what led Newton and others to invent differential equations. So what we do in this particular application is we don't just fit data, we develop a model. And this is developed after Torricelli, who was a student of Galileo. And he invented the barometer, which tells you barometric pressure. And I think he had a way cool mustache. But this is his law. And when I teach this, I do not tell the students this differential equations right away. I'm telling it to you to give you an idea in a shortened presentation. This is his law that said the rate at which the height changes depends upon the height. When the height is big, the water column falls faster. You have an intuitive feeling about that. When you have all that water pressing down, it ought to exit the bottom faster. It certainly depends upon gravity. If the gravitational field were very, very big, like on Jupiter, the water would fall faster. If it was on the moon, it would fall less. If it was on the top of Mount Everest in Nepal, it would fall less as well. And the B is a constant that has to do with the viscosity of the liquid, the opening of the hole, et cetera, et cetera. So what you do is you use some first principles to develop that differential equations. And those first principles involve the conservation of energy, namely the principle that says kinetic plus potential energy is conserved. There are all kinds of energy. There's molecular, there's nuclear, et cetera, electrical, but potential and kinetic are the energies that involve physical media. And from that, you can develop, after you've applied these first principles, this differential equation. You can now say to students, how are we going to find out what H is? I told you what dHdt is. How do you find what H is? So instead of just presenting this technique, we've now arrived at the point where we want to know what H is, and the students are ready to receive techniques. So we motivate the differential equations, and here you see the result of solving it. We put in some of the data, the initial conditions, the gravitational acceleration constant, and we get an equation number one that says the height is depending upon this one parameter B and time in seconds. And what we do is we try to find out what is the best parameter B. So we take the difference between our data and our model, we square that, we add that up, and we try to minimize the sum of the square errors. This is called the least squares technique that you may have used in your science classes. And in doing so, we estimate the parameter by going to, and I use Excel, and you have the data and you have the model, and all of this is online and you can look it up. And what you do is you try to find the parameter B, and you can see it there in small print in the center of your screen. The initial estimate is 0.002. And if you try to get better, you get the estimate for parameter B is 0.02581. And you can see the data and the model are almost a perfect fit. This is a physical model, so your data and the model should be expected to be quite good. In the social science, modeling is a lot different. The data and the model don't fit because of human behavior and lots of stochastic properties. So this would be an assignment that I would give. Write an overview. You as a student rewrite and you do your own derivation, and then you go to the site and collect data, and we have lots and lots of videos for different cylinders and configurations, and you estimate your own parameter B. Okay, so I am finished with my formal talk, and I'm going to stop sharing now and return to our hosts and ask if there are conversations or questions or suggestions. And I thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. Sejal, can you take up?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Winkel. Your life story is so inspiring. Everything about your journey from starting out as a student like us to now a highly accomplished and reputed personality in the world of mathematics is exactly what we needed to change our mindset as to how we perceive opportunities in life. Your words have truly motivated us and ignited our spirits to continue forward, seize whatever opportunity life throws our way, and embrace the challenges that come along with it. This webinar could possibly bring that, dare I say, a turn of events in our professional life and otherwise. I cannot stress this enough, but we are beyond honored to have had this talk with you and listen to your journey from your own self. Thank you for giving us a fresh perspective. I would also like to thank our teachers for suggesting this symposium and making this happen and guiding us throughout. I am sure a lot of us have loads of questions to ask Professor Winkel and to take every bit of detail or advice from him. So I now open the floor for questions. Once again, please refrain yourself from unmuting. You can also you can always use the chat box. Sajan and I will take the questions one by one.
Thank you.
Yeah. I saw one question that said, what was the best model you saw that I had seen? And I will tell you, in T, and it is an exciting and interesting problem, and it causes students to really think deeply about how they use their data. It's called the spread of oil slick, and you can see it on our site. And if you're a teacher, you get access to the student solutions to problems. If you're a student, you get access at Symbiode to the statement of the problem. But it's a very powerful example of how you do modeling, even when your data is bad. So that's probably been the most useful and interesting model that I've used for years and years, among many others. So that was one question that came up.
Thank you, sir. We have loads of questions. So starting with Mr. Sushil Kumar's question, he's actually a research scholar and he's working in modeling with this specific area as COVID-19. And he wants to ask, in which field are you working, like physical or biological?
Okay, so here's a confession. I am not a researcher. I have never published a research paper in my life. Okay, I have published many, many papers on teaching, on how to motivate students, etc. And so I don't actively do research, but I have read and bring research from modeling into class for my students. And I have associated myself with lots of people. In fact, there's a man named Elisha Peterson, who was a teacher at West Point with me, who now runs the data for the Center for Disease Control on COVID. Elisha is a Rhodes Scholar, a PhD, who works at Johns Hopkins University, and he is the man in charge of all of the data that the CDC in the United States produces for the media. And so he's well aware of the research that is being done, and many, many, many projects. And as you well know, someone comes up with a different drug, a different scheme. And I think for anyone doing COVID research, what you have to do is grab a hold of one aspect and try to work on it. So for example, we have Omicron. So you read that Omicron doesn't affect the lungs as much as the previous versions. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of hospitalization? It means maybe you have different kinds of issues. So I don't have any research advice, but I do know there's so much going on in COVID that understanding a little bit about the science as well as the data and the changing, which is where the differential equations would be to your benefit. So I can't quite give that advice.
So talking about COVID-19, Disha would like to know if you've ever yourself tried to model COVID-19 data yourself.
Yeah, I did with some students in Panama, and they continued. I stopped because they wanted to go on. One of the problems, and I'm not, is getting the data and getting realistic data. I was using data for the county, the region I lived in the United States in New York, and they were using data for Panama City, but the Panamanian government stopped publishing data. That was a political decision, and the United States continued to publish data. So we were modeling the spread and the hospitalization rates, and they continued, and I had to stop because I couldn't concentrate on that. I was doing other things. But there are lots, and I did some consulting for what are called decoy models. In other words, you would inject some cells that looked like the human cells, and COVID would attack the decoys. And when it attacked the decoys, it would attach and therefore not be free to attach the humans. And one of my former students is a medical professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And so I did several months of consulting with him, but they continued the project. He wanted me to give general mathematical support to that project. So there are lots and lots of approaches, and I don't know whether that decoy approach has been used in some of the medications, but the whole idea was to have the decoy for the COVID spikes to attach, and therefore they would be taken out of circulation and wouldn't attack the humans, all in the breathing passage. So I haven't done actual research, but I've participated with some, and many people use mathematics, not just statistics. They were using differential equations.
Thank you, Professor. So the next question has been asked by Prasanna, and he says, Professor, having worked in both cryptology and modeling, do you find any overlap between these two fields? And more generally, which was the most exciting research problems in the intersection of differential equations and number theory?
Well, both of them are challenged. So when you're in cryptology, there's two parts. There's making up a cipher and there's breaking a cipher. In cryptology, we call the field of making ciphers cryptography, and we call the field of breaking ciphers cryptanalysis. And cryptanalysis is very, very difficult. And it's difficult primarily because of number theory. The Rivest-Shamir Adelman RSA algorithm that was built in the 1970s is based on prime number factorization. And if I give you the product of two large primes, and I'm talking about primes that are like hundreds of digits long. If I give you the product of two primes, in order to break the cipher or read the cipher, you have to know the two primes themselves. It will take the lifetime of the universe by trial and error to find the factorizations of the primes. And so these problems in cryptanalysis are very difficult. In a similar way, modeling is very difficult. If you think of COVID, it's such a complex situation involving chemistry, biology, even physics in terms of the motion of the aerosol products in the air, because that's what it is. When I talk, my aerosol sprays and you catch that COVID, that's physics, because the projection of the particles is like a projectile motion. But I've not had any common areas. I've not done differential equations applied to number theory, but anytime you do difference equations, discrete differential equations, there are lots of recursion reactions that occur in number theory. A Fibonacci sequence is an example. There are lots of number theoretic algebraic recursive functions There are techniques like generating functions that are used in algebra. They're used in probability and statistics. When I was in graduate school, I had to take a probability course because when I went to this new school, they said you have to have a minor in physics, philosophy, or probability. And I didn't like physics. I was not good at philosophy, so I took probability. And I had a hard time with that course. And the next semester, the professor who was teaching it invited me to be his student grader. And he said, I'm inviting you to be the grader and teach the recitations because it will help you learn probability. So I learned that, and probability uses lots of differential equations and stochastic processes, just like recursion techniques. So there are lots of overlying skill sets that you need, but I don't know any one problem in differential equations that fell into cryptology directly, just techniques.
Thank you, sir. That was really great to know. The next question is, I think, what all mathematics students must have once wondered at some point. Anant Narayan has asked, respected professor, having a passion and deep love for mathematics, is it right to expect myself to be constantly engaged with the subject? He also added, sometimes spending on other things that I enjoy makes me wonder if I should be spending that much time on mathematics instead, which I do enjoy, but sometimes feel a bit guilty when I try other things.
Yes. So for example, supposing you are studying mathematics and your friend introduces you to the violin and you become in love with the violin. If that's what really excites you, and practicing and learning how to do, I play the piano and the organ. So I never understand how violinists decide where to hold their fingers, because on a piano, the key is right in front of me. But if you're fascinated by that and drawn into that, then you need to go there. You know, I can tell you that in mathematics, you will be able to use those skills, as your vice principal said earlier, in a variety of areas. And your ability to quantify things, your ability to analyze problems will help you, but you don't have to be a mathematician to use and appreciate mathematics. In fact, many mathematicians like music. Music and mathematics goes together, not just because of the underlying physics of sound, but because of patterns, but because of rhythms and etc. So yeah, if mathematics as a study is drawing you closer and closer, then let that happen, because you will always find people who value that enough to hire you and pay you. If you get on an airplane and you sit next to someone and you tell them you are in mathematics, I will bet you that 9 times out of 10, they will say, oh, I was never good in mathematics. Okay? If you think about the fact that almost everyone you meet in the world will say to you, I was never good in mathematics, and the fact that mathematics is at the core of many of our human endeavors, if you know mathematics, you are one step ahead of everyone else, because they are scared of mathematics. They had a bad experience. They will say things like, I can't even balance my checkbook. Well, I got news for you. I'm a mathematician and I don't balance checkbooks. But learning mathematics will help you whether you study it formally or not. And many times there's a French mathematician named Poincaré. And Poincaré's philosophy was that mathematics is in the subconscious. You are working on a mathematical problem in the back of your brain as a mathematician all the time, so that when you sit down to actually do it, it's already developed. The same is true of an artist. The same is true of an engineer. The same is true of a bus driver who knows her route, and does it every day, but she also knows, I need to watch out for ambulances at this intersection. That's happening in the back of her brain, so that when this happens, they're ready. that's the mentality I developed as a lifeguard. At the beach, you think this could happen. So if your passion is math, let it be. And if your passion is math and it changes to science or it changes to literature or music, let that be as well, because the knowledge you learn from mathematics will always transfer because it allows you to organize and see patterns. So go with your passion.
Thank you, sir. I think that was very inspiring. So Shakya here wants to ask, do you remember any of your challenge that you faced while solving any of your modeling problems? And what do you think are the most important skills that we must inculcate to improve ourselves in maths?
Well, you got to practice. You've got to do some routine problems, but don't do as many as your professors assign. Sometimes professors assign too many routine problems. You want to do more challenging problems. You want to ask of yourself more challenging problems. When you do puzzles, you start out as a child with 20-piece puzzles. And then you go older, you get to 200-piece. Then you get 1,000-piece puzzles. You want to always challenge yourself. Some of the more challenging problems that I've done for modeling, remember, I read the literature and then I try to bring that mathematics and data from a cancer research journal to my students. So that means I have to understand what the modeler is talking about in a scholarly journal. And usually in a scholarly journal, the argument is very condensed, very brief. And so then I have to spend my time with lots and lots of writing on a yellow pad, analyzing how did he get from this step to that step. So following logical arguments using mathematical skills, and he would go from one step to the next, and he would never say the word eigenvalue, but it turns out he was using eigenvalues and eigenvalue analysis. And I went, oh, that's what's happening. So sometimes it might take you 20 minutes, half an hour. Sometimes you have to put it down and let that subconscious work on you, and then come back to it. And so it's okay to stop. I mean, if you're in an exam, you have no choice, right? You have 1 hour, you have to do, but it's okay to put some things down and come back to them, because your brain will work on them even though they're not in the front. And when I would tell my wife, I have to go upstairs and prepare for class tomorrow. I will be back in a couple of hours. In 10 minutes, I was back. And she said, what happened? And of course, all during the day, I was thinking about class for the next day, and it was all in my mind, and all I had to do is write it down. After our daughter died at 26, which was really traumatic, I was grieving for a year, and my mind was occupied with grief for my daughter. And eventually, I still miss her, I care for her, but the grief was not as deep. And I felt guilty because I wasn't grieving as much. But what was happening was the back of my mind was letting go of the grief, and the normal things that had happened before Laura died were returning to my mind. And so I was now more prepared. But in the year after she died, when I would sit down to prepare my lessons, my mind had no idea what was going to happen, because my mind was occupied with grief, not with the background mathematics. So take advantage of the fact that if you put something down, the next time you pick it up, you will actually perhaps be better off. I do puzzles, crossword puzzles in the New York Times. And when I get frustrated because I can't do anymore, I put it down. And a couple of hours later, I pick it up and boom, there's a big word that I didn't even know before that all of a sudden has appeared. So when you're doing problems, don't be afraid to just set it aside. If you work in industry, you probably work on many problems at a time. You'll be on teams of people, and there you'll go from meeting A to meeting B, and your mind will have to shift. The same may go for academic as well. Your friend will come into your office. he will write on the board, I'm working on this equation, I can't get this help, and you were working on something entirely differently. And now when you shift to work on his problem, he goes out the office, you return to your problem and you go, oh, it's that easy. So shifting between problems is often good, as long as you come back to work. Don't just keep shifting. So.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you saying that. Sometimes we really need to put things down, take a break, and start out fresh. That's more beneficial. Thank you, sir. We really needed to know that.
Yeah, maybe go out for a run or a gym or something, or play
Yes, sir,
cards
definitely.
or something.
Whatever makes you feel good after that.
Yes.
Okay, sir. So the next question is really interesting. It's been asked by Alice. She says, Professor, you have earned a PhD in algebra, but later you completely changed your field of teaching. Did that transition bother you? Because we sometimes refrain ourselves from doing what we are actually passionate about, just because of the fear of not able to fitting in.
Yes. So you will find that your career, I will almost guarantee every one of you will have a career change. Even if supposing you go into a very specialized field like actuary, and you have a statistics background, you will go into actuary, and you'll be worrying about setting policies for health insurance, etc. All of a sudden, you will realize that, the insurance companies collect money called premiums, and they set the premiums based on medical care. But what do they do with that money? Well, you know what they do with it? They invest the money. Now you are in an actuarial insurance position, and instead of worrying about premiums and healthcare, you are now on the investment side. And so all of a sudden you've become an investment banker, and you never thought you would be that. You thought you would be a statistician setting premiums for dental care instead of portfolios in stock markets. So, and it's supposing you go into a high school teaching, and you think, I'm going to be teaching ninth, whatever form you're teaching, and I'm going to be teaching geometry, and all of a sudden your colleague says, we need someone to teach computers. And you go, I use computers, but I don't know that much, but we need someone to teach computers now. The next thing you know, you will become a computer teacher in your school, or you get your students involved in extracurricular activities. They go to math contests or something. And so your career will change. My career changed radically from pure mathematics to applied mathematics. In fact, I was such a committed pure mathematician that I can remember saying, if it has any applications, I don't want to know about it. I was focused on just the purity of the mathematics, and now I'm just the opposite. If it doesn't have any applications, I respect it, but I don't want to study it. Of course, algebra has tremendous applications in communication, in error correcting codes, in electrical engineering. Algebra is all over the place. And so even though it was pure when I started, it's very, very applicable. And the knowledge of structures of algebra is very helpful. And algebra has lots of theoretical proofs. When you're in mathematics, Ramanujan the famous Indian mathematician, could visualize things, but he could not prove them. And Hardy, the British mathematician that Ramanujan spent time with in England, was the man who was able to prove things. Incidentally, I saw the movie about Ramanujan, and Dev Patel, who is the Indian actor who played him. When I went to the movie house in New York to see it, Dev Patel was there at the grand opening. So I got to meet him. And even though he's of Indian background, he grew up in London. And it was a beautiful story from an Indian mathematician. So the point is that you will use your mathematics, and you will change, and it will be something that's quite natural. You will be drawn to some new aspect. Someone will say, we need someone to teach a statistics course. And you said, I never even took a statistics course. And the next thing you know, you'll say, this is fascinating. So for example, you can, when I teach statistics, 1,500 randomly determined phone numbers in the United States can determine the future of $100 million television show. By polling 1,500 people at random, you can get a pretty good confidence level as to how much appreciation there is for a television show, and you can yank it off the television air just by knowing what 1,500 people think. And that is the power of statistics. So I was drawn into statistics equally well, but I'd never done any work. I've taught lots of statistics. So let your passion pull you ahead, you know, and you'll be successful.
Thank you, sir. That was a wonderful answer. I would just like to quote one very famous saying, that the only thing that is constant in life is change. And
Yes.
after your answer, I would like to add that other than change, there's also knowledge. Whatever you gain, it's going to stay with you. And that's also and it's up to you how you incorporate it with other things if you change your field in case. So that was a really good answer. Thank you so much, sir.
Yes.
So we have
So
one. Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
No. Go ahead. Question.
So we have one last question from a faculty member, Mr. Tapshi, and he's asking if you could please connect neural networks and mathematical modeling.
Yeah, neural networks and is a way to go. Many people use agent-based modeling and neural networks to solve differential equations, especially large systems, because you have the power to simulate on a computer that didn't exist early on. Remember Isaac Newton, when he was studying F equals ma, that's what he was focused on, and studying the motion of stars and the change in their position. So this was simple but complicated systems. And now when we're studying lots and lots of things, instead of saying let X be the number of COVID molecules, we can now give each molecule an identity, and we can study millions of them at a time and use a neural network or agent-based modeling that never could have been used maybe 15 years ago because of the power of computing. When I was at Brown University, we had a PC and we had a giant mainframe, and Professor Tom Banks, who brought me there, said, do you know, in the future, in 20 years from now, the power of that mainframe is going to be able to sit on your desktop? And every one of his students went, you have got to be crazy. That will never happen. Well, it has happened. And you can do neural nets and agent-based. And the question is, you have to learn about it. There are skills, there are new theorems, new approaches. And one of the most important things I teach my students is that if there is an algorithm, you want to know, and this is where the theory comes in, you want to know that it is a converging algorithm, that it is stable, that it has an equilibrium that can be approached. And neural networks all have that aspect, that the power of the algorithm is only as good as the theory behind it that says this will converge. Because if your algorithm just goes wildly, chaotically through things and never converges, you're not going to learn anything. And Sejal is right, and Uditi was right by saying that you will learn and remember. And as I get older, I find it's harder to remember. But there'll be certain triggers in your mind that will say, yeah, that's a recursion. I need to get to second order difference equation. Or even in a neural network, I need to set up a relationship between nodes. And so I need to learn a little more graph theory to do that. Or agent-based, I need to keep track of a large number of things, and there are more efficient algorithms. I think when people first learn about neural networks and agent-based, they think I have an infinite number of nodes. The answer is no, you don't. you only have a finite number, and you have to learn to live with that, even though it's more than just 5 or 10, it might be 100 million. But still, 100 million is limiting. If you think of the number of stars in the universe, 100 million is nothing. You know, so I think the students that I've spoken to and the questions that they've asked speak well for you and your futures and for your university as it turns into 60 plus years. And I hope that you will be inspired to be creative, to ask questions, and that your faculty there will come along with you and ask questions. I know that Swaran Singh is a person who encourages students to ask questions, and he's not afraid, just like I am, to admit, I don't know that. I have said I don't know many, many times in front of students. The first time the students see you say, I don't know, they kind of look at you like, well, you're the professor and you're supposed to know. And the answer is, no, I'm supposed to help you learn. That's my job. And if I don't know something, I will find out for you and with you and learn with you. And when you teach mathematical modeling, that happens all the time. A student will come to class from chemical engineering and saying, we're going to use the Horowitz algorithm. And I go, what is the Horowitz algorithm? And they will say something to you, and you will learn it. Years ago, my first teaching assignment, I was in graduate school. I was 20 years old. I was teaching night school to adults who were in their 50s, and they were calling me Mr. Winkel. And no adult ever called me Mr. Winkel. I was simply Brian. And we were doing mixing problems, so many of this kind and so many of that kind. And they were farmers who were coming back to night school in Michigan, and they had ways to mix grains for their cattle. And so they said, we don't do that. Here's the formula. Here's the way we mix grains. And they tried to explain it to me during the class, and I couldn't understand it. So I said to them, tell me it again. And I went home, and the next day's class, I came back and I showed them how their technique was exactly the same as the technique I was teaching them. And I related the two, and I became their hero. They fell in love with me because I spent the time learning their approach and comparing it to theirs. So what started out with I don't know turned into I learned, I know, and I embrace what you're doing, and I show you the relationship. So as young students, you say, I don't know all the time, but then you do something about it. You get a book, you go online. I don't use a cookbook anymore. I just go online. If I want to do something with tomatoes, I don't go to a cookbook. In fact, my wife and I decided not to move our cookbooks. We got rid of them because we go online and we learn new and exciting recipes that we never looked at before that didn't exist when the books were printed. So you're always growing and learning. And I think you as students, especially those of you who are in some sort of leadership position, know that. So again, I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor, for being so kind and answering so many questions. Also, a huge applause for such enthusiasm shown by the attendees. However, we have to conclude our Q&A session here. I now request the association in charge, Mr. Anirban Chatterjee, to present a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Diti. Okay, so good evening, everyone. On behalf of Mathematics Department of Sri Venkateshwara College, I extend a warm welcome to everyone present here. I extend my gratitude to the Honorable Speaker, Professor Brian Winkel, for taking out time from his busy schedule to grace the event. Thank you for sharing your life experience with us. It was very inspiring and versatile. A special thanks to our principal, Professor Sheila Reddy, and Vice Principal Dr. Venkat Kumar for providing me immense support to make this webinar a success. I thank Professor Swaran Singh for giving me an opportunity to connect with Professor Brian for this webinar. Otherwise, we wouldn't experience such an enriching session. I also thank our teacher in charge, Dr. Deepti Jain, for her invaluable guidance. And I must thank our organizing volunteers for their hard work in the past few days. I congratulate all the participants for their active participation. You'll get your certificates shortly via email. And thank you again for this, for making this a great success. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you very much. And I want to say a special thank you to Swarn. And we will do a Zoom conference once we get all hooked up here, and then we will meet again. And I see that Nimish was online, and that's glad to hear he's doing well. So that's a personal reach out to Swarn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So are we going to sign off now, Anirban?
Yes, sir. Yeah, Uditi, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So just one last favor from all the panelists. You are all requested to turn on your cameras for a quick snapshot.
Right. I request my learned colleagues, so please switch on your cameras for a quick snapshot.
Oh.
Yeah, Uditi, you are in Spotlight, I guess.
Oh, so I don't know how to fix that. Can someone please look into that?
You would have to unmute. You'd have to mute yourself, and so there's a view option on the right side upwards.
Yeah.
So you could choose gallery from there.
Gallery. Okay. Okay. Now it's coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay. So with this, we have reached the conclusion of our webinar. Thank you, Professor, for gracing the occasion with your benign presence. We are truly honored. And I also thank everyone who took out time to join this webinar. We hope it has been a fruitful session for all, and I'm sure each one of us has learned something new. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. This is the awkward time at the end of every meeting. Who says goodbye first, right?
Okay.
So
sir.
I will say goodbye because shortly the people will come to put floor in my dining room, and they will be at my door shortly. So I need to go to meet them, and I thank you very much. And I hope we can do this sometime either in the small group or in a large group. And I would love to participate with a number of you, not just as a keynote speaker. It has been my joy to do that, and I hope someday to get to Delhi to meet some of you. Thank you very much, and I will say goodbye. Bye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Goodbye, sir.
Thank you,
Bye
sir.
now.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, then I'm ending the meeting. Okay.
So I'll just stop the recording just a second.
Yeah. Go ahead.